When I say the words US Aviation, what do you think? Most people in the US probably think of a massive headache with long lines to security, an airport that looks uninteresting, a hit or miss flight, and just a thing that everyone just wants to get over with. US Aviation used to be in the golden age, but now the airlines and airports are just subpar and there isn't really any experience. It isn't bad, but it is subtly inferior to airports in Europe and Asia. In this video, we will be talking about why US airports are worse than European airlines. Now, where do we start? US airports are rated among the worst airports in the world, but why? According to Global Citizen Solutions, the US was the richest country in the world. The US has an overall net worth of $145.8 trillion and a GDP of $25.46 trillion. And for well over 60 years, they were the richest country. So why are the airports and airlines in the US subtly inferior to the European and Asian aviation? Well, simply, they don't need to. Why do US airports and airlines have no need to improve and be better? Well, let's start with the airport. The FFP Stories, quote-unquote, says that nearly every major airport in the US is owned by a local government or authority, such as a Port Authority. The result is that many airports are run by Federal Airport Improvement Program, or aka the government fleet, like a government bureaucracy, I don't know how to say that word, instead of an efficient competitive business. And that many US airports don't need to compete with other airlines, basically because they're owned by the government. They don't need to draw in people from other airports. They have no reason to be better. They just have to, be functional. Which they are functional, but they aren't like top quality. They have no need to compete. They just have to be there just to transport passengers, and they have no need to compete since all the money is going to the US government. FFA Story says the big chunk of taxes goes to fund the airport improvement program, which provides the grants for most capital projects in the US airports of a tune for $3.4 billion this year. The sad reality is that significant airports require the most capital investment. US commercial airports have no need to improve. Let's compare it with European airports. For a European airport, for a guy who lived in the US for like his entire life, for me, I've been to only a few overseas airports, like India, since I was born in India anyway. Like Chennai Airport, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Paris CDG. So let's compare with CDG. I've personally been to Paris CDG airport, and I've seen that the airport has a better experience. Everything is handled better. Security is way more efficient. But I do have TSA, so that doesn't really matter. The airport has just better architecture. It looks beautiful, and they just handle everything better. Transiting internationally is like 10 times better. This brings me to my next point. But still, one point that US airlines have between European airlines is because if you're a US citizen, transiting is much easier. Because in Paris, like the airport is so big, it's very hard to transfer. So that's like the only downside for European airports, because they really suck at transiting. But other than that, they are very good and much better than US airports. This brings me to my next point: airport transit. Transiting in US airport internationally is next to impossible if you don't have a proper US visa. Let that sink in. Unlike European airports, you cannot transit internationally, and you have to enter the US to transit. So if you have to enter the US and have a massive headache, Asian and European airports handle this better by at least, you don't need to enter the country. If you can't enter the country, it's fine. You just have to go to security and just show them a passport. But in the US, you have to pay like a really outrageous fee to like enter the US just to transit, which is like a nightmare. So let's just say you want to go to Athens and to Auckland via New York City. Well, if you can't enter the US, you're out of luck. So let's say you have to enter the US with the proper visa. Well, you have to go get your bag and go to security again, because there's no airline that continues. Like American, Delta, United, they don't connect. They only transport people into the US, not to and from destination. And you have to check in. Well, you have to also get your bag and get through security again. And also you have to check in. That's why there's no fifth freedom route to making a US ground stop, because you need a US citizen or a visa to again, let's compare it to like one famous fifth freedom route. Singapore Airlines is A380 from Singapore to New York via Frankfurt. But don't be like, hey, you still have to go to the US. It's at the end destination, so it really doesn't matter. New York is the final destination, so you really do not need to transfer in New York. Because Frankfurt allows the A380 to take a ground stop, and it's much easier to transfer because you don't need to actually enter Frankfurt. All your bags will stay on board, and it wouldn't be much of a headache. But due to Frankfurt regulations, you do have to exit the airplane, which like other airlines don't need. Like KLM's route from not Auckland. Oh my god, I butchered that. Like KLM's route from Amsterdam to Dubai via Kuwait City. As famous travel blogger Nonstop Dan told them that they had to actually stay on the plane, so they really did not need to like go to security. But in Frankfurt, you actually do have to go to security, but you really do not need to enter the city. So let's move on to airlines. So because we've been trashing airports a lot, why are they inferior to European and Asian airlines? It's simply because they don't have to. American, Delta, and United, they're the most profitable airlines. According to Simple Flying, the most profitable airline in the world is Delta Airlines. Delta is widely regarded as some of the best airlines in the world, with modern cabins on their A350, A330, and Boeing 767. They do have a good economy class product, but it can still be a hit or miss. Simple Flying says that Delta, Southwest, and Lufthansa Group airlines, which includes United, and the Air France KLM Group. Wait, no, not the Air France Group. And also the One World Alliance team, which includes American Airlines, are also very profitable. So all three U.S. airlines are one of the most profitable airlines in the world. So why isn't it, like top tier? Well, Delta's economy class is actually top tier, like I just said a few seconds ago. But it can still be a hit or miss. Anyways, let's go to Nonstop Dan for a quick interview to show what his experiences are like since he visited everywhere in the world. Thank you, Nonstop Dan, for taking time out of your day for me to interview you. So Dan, how does a U.S. airport experience and a U.S. aviation experience differ?
Hi, finally getting to answer this. So sorry about the wait. So to answer your first question, the biggest difference is that in the U.S., pretty much all airports, actually all except one, are government owned. They're publicly owned, which means they are, government run facilities. There will be less incentive to maximize revenue from those facilities, but there will also be less incentive to keep them modern and competitive since the airports are not competing against each other. Meanwhile, in Europe, almost 40% of airports are privately owned, and most of the others have a private-public split. In other words, this means that those airports are companies that are competing with each other for revenue, which means they need to improve the experience much more.
How does a US airline and European airline differ in quality of experience?
When it comes to the second question, there are a few differences, but frankly, US airlines, although they used to be much less competitive, have greatly improved their seats to the point where most of them have better seats than European airlines nowadays. And what you get is, a reflection of the different cultures. So in Europe, you get a reflection of German culture or French culture, depending on the airline that you're flying. While in the US, it's all going to be the same culture, which reflects what service on US airlines are like, while service can be much more variable in Europe.
That was very interesting. Why Asian and European transit experience is better than the US transit experience?
Okay, so to answer question 3, we're gonna have, at least one international flight in this example. So whether you're arriving on an international flight or leaving on an international flight, generally the reason that transiting in the US is not as smooth of an experience is that when you're arriving on an international flight, you need to clear immigration and customs at the airport you fly into. And sadly, the US is not the most efficient when it comes to that. So people have to wait a long time and then they have to recheck their bags. And that applies even if you're connecting via the US to another country. Let's say you're going from Europe to Mexico, you still have to collect your bags. The same goes for anywhere you're connecting. And this does not apply in Europe and Asia, meaning that transfer times can be a lot shorter. Generally, airports are also a bit smaller, at least in Europe, than many of the big hubs in the US. So there's just less complexity.
Yeah, I see. So why do you think the golden age of US aviation is gone?
To answer question 4, the golden age really started ending when the airline industry was deregulated and airlines, it all became about profits pretty much. So nowadays, airlines are publicly traded companies and they need to maximize the returns for their shareholders. And ultimately, the shareholders are the people paying or sustaining the airlines, not really the customers. And an even more important point is that nowadays, airlines make more money from credit cards than they do from actually operating flights. So they're not really in the flying business, they're in the bank business, and it's all around finances. So the reason that US airlines are not in a golden age anymore or don't have an incredible onboard experience is just that their revenue and their focus is elsewhere. Finally, point 5, I don't think the experience will improve significantly. I think the soft product could improve a bit as they're finding ways to, improve the experience without necessarily raising the cost a lot. I think we've seen Delta pushing the envelope a bit by trying to gain a competitive advantage by offering a little bit more on board, and people actually respond to that and have a strong preference for Delta in many cases. So Delta's proving to other airlines like United, who's also following them now, that by improving the onboard experience at least a few percent, maybe 10% or 20%, and increasing those costs, you'll also get an increased return, going back to being revenue and profit focused. So that basically shows them that investing more might make them even more money.
Oh wow, that is pretty interesting. Thank you for your time, Dan. Anyways, US airlines also form joint ventures, which is a very powerful type of partnership where basically they're more than partnership. They can both work together and perform the same routes and same flights, and they do not need to compete. All three major US airlines have a joint venture. United is with the Lufthansa Group, Delta is with the Air France and KLM Group, and the American and British Airways also have a joint venture. That way they don't have any competition for international routes. So let's say you want to go through Delta. You want to go with Air France for like New York to Paris. If you book through Air France and your flight shows up at the Delta aircraft, it'll tell you to basically eat dirt. Well, not actually. Basically, this eliminates any form of competition through international travel and shows how US airlines have to be better than each other. They don't need to be better than the airlines there. They need to compete for international travel. They just have to offer like a cheaper price just to get people to travel. And also, US airlines are privately owned. Unlike the government-owned, like the Middle Eastern airlines, like Emirates, Qatar, and Singapore, they are all government-owned, so they want to be the best so they can represent their country. But they also have competition with other airlines, so they can't have easier transit. So what have we learned? Well, it's that US airlines and airports don't have to be the best. They must have no competition, and the airport delivers a hit or miss. Same with the airline. In my opinion, I believe that US airports and airlines will continue to get worse. Due to, well, they don't need to be the best. If you live in the US, but sorry, but you're stuck with the big three that can deliver mediocre experiences. That's all that is pretty crazy. That is wild. For real. Sorry. Anyways, thank you for Nonstop Dan once again for helping me with this video. I suggest checking out his channel for no nonsense reviews, and all his reviews are like legit and self-funded. He makes amazing content, and I've been watching his videos for almost a year. Anyways, bye guys.